High energy bills and fears of summer blackouts. It's the same conversation we have year on year about the nation's power reserves. So with an election just around the corner, the coalition is promising a nuclear solution. We'll find out this week just how much that plan is expected to cost. But what we know for certain is it's dividing the nation.
With rolling hills and irrigated farmland, this valley is the centre of Gippsland, where nearly a quarter of Australia's dairy comes from, more than a quarter of Victoria's beef and vegetables, plus most of the state's electricity. Now, it could go nuclear.
We need to bring something into the valley.
I think we need to get it as soon as we can.
It won't bring jobs, it'll bring hatred.
It's criminal.
It says my children, my grandchildren and the next generations.
This is Victoria's Loy Yang power station in the Latrobe Valley. At 200 metres deep and 5 kilometres wide, it's our country's biggest brown coal mine and one of 7 sites proposed by the coalition to become a nuclear power plant. It's less than 10 kilometres from Traralgon, a regional centre that's relied on and been scarred by changes to the coal industry for decades, and faces more losses with power stations set to close in the next few years.
Coal-fired power is a huge part of our community here. After privatisation, thousands of jobs were lost and people moved away.
After spending his life in oil and gas, Adrian Cosgriff was open to the prospect of nuclear power and new jobs.
We thought, well, that's maybe a solution, but once we looked into it, we realised that the fundamentals of a baseload power station here just don't stack up. So they're kind of giving false hope to the community, which is what I find really frustrating.
Community group Voices of the Valley have been speaking out.
No to nuclear!
I see the whole nuclear debate as something that's designed to delay the transition to renewables.
I think it's criminal that a huge investment is being proposed when it's really unnecessary.
The group rallying as a parliamentary inquiry came to town last week.
Too risky, we say no!
And addressing it personally.
The panel wasn't particularly interested in our evidence.
We were told that, we will consult with the community for 2.5 years, but then we would do it anyway, we would build nuclear.
Wendy Farmer has spent her whole life in the valley. She fears nuclear power would leave her community far worse off.
It's as toxic and as dangerous as it ever was. Any accident would destroy Latrobe Valley, completely destroy it.
Her fear based on knowing firsthand what happens when things go wrong at power stations, after the Hazelwood mine site burnt for 45 days in 2014.
At least 45 days of smoke. We had some chance of recovery. Nuclear, we have none.
And she's far from alone.
Accident happens, it's a forever thing.
It's going to cause a lot of destruction around this area.
We live in the wake of the biggest environmental and industrial disaster that Victoria's ever seen. I feel like a bit of a testing ground, a bit of a dumping ground where we just get one thing after the other.
It's been 6 months since Peter Dutton launched the nuclear proposal.
This is a plan for our country which will underpin a century of economic growth.
But there's still very little detail.
It might be the dumbest policy ever put forward by a major political party.
The coalition calls it a coal to nuclear transition that would overturn state and federal bans on nuclear energy.
We want to utilise the existing assets that we've got and the poles and wires that are used at the moment on the coal-fired power station sites.
The 7 proposed sites are across 5 states. Mount Piper and Liddell in New South Wales, Toorong and Mount Murchison in Queensland, Collie in WA, Port Augusta in South Australia, as well as Traralgon in Victoria.
We're going to have to move with the times. That's all there is to it.
You've got to go modern. You can't stop these things.
The CSIRO's Next Gen report, released earlier this year, found renewables were the cheapest form of energy. After criticism from the coalition, the report was redone with different data. This week, the new version revealed nuclear power is still about 50% more expensive than wind and solar.
Even if you don't believe in climate change, it's a superior solution economically.
Dr John Harries from the Australian Nuclear Association believes the costs can't really be considered without lifting the current bans.
vendors aren't willing to come and sort of offer realistic costing for Australia when it's illegal to even consider it.
Aidan Morrison from the Centre of Independent Studies is an expert in the field. He says nuclear can bring down power bills.
By adopting nuclear as a future policy, we can make sure that prices don't rise any further in the meantime, and in the long term it should bring prices back down.
And sees it as a safe option.
It's pure steam that comes out of those large towers, and so there's actually also less radiation around a nuclear plant than there is a coal plant.
But for those who may have to live with it permanently, there's no guarantee of what could happen if disaster struck.
We can't say an accident won't happen.
Any nuclear spill here, it's going to go all the way to Melbourne and it's going to go all the way to Bairnsdale. And that's a big corridor where a lot of people live and a lot of food is produced.